The Stanford prison experiment was a psychological experiment conducted in 1971. It was a 2-week simulation of a prison environment. Stanford University psychology professor Philip Zimbardo led the research team who administered the study. It was intended to measure the effect of role-playing and social expectations on behavior over a period of 2 weeks. Participants were recruited from the local community with an ad in the newspapers offering $15 per day, $108 in 2022 to male students who wanted to participate in a psychological study of prison life. Volunteers were chosen after assessments of psychological stability and then randomly assigned to being prisoners or prison guards. 75 men applied, and after screening assessments and interviews, 24 applicants were judged to be physically and mentally healthy. The applicants were predominantly white, middle class, and appeared to be psychologically stable and healthy. The group of subjects was intentionally selected to exclude those with criminal backgrounds, psychological impairments, or medical problems. The day before the experiment began, the guards were instructed not to harm the prisoners physically or withhold food or drink, but to maintain law and order. Guards were instructed by the researchers to disrespect the prisoners and make them feel submissive, helpless, and unheard. On day 1, the experiment officially started when prisoners were arrested by Real Palo Alto police. The participants were intentionally not informed that they would be arrested, as the researchers wanted it to come as a surprise. On day 2, prisoners refused to leave their cells to eat in the yard, ripped off their inmate number tags, took off their stocking caps, and insulted the guards. In response, guards removed all of the prisoners' clothes, removed mattresses, and sentenced the main instigators to time in the hole, which didn't match their instructions, but Zimbardo let the guards act as they wanted. On day 3, the guards rewarded prisoners who had minor roles in the rebellion with clothing, beds, and food. On day 4 and day 5, the guards continued to psychologically abuse the inmate by putting bags over their heads and forcing the prisoners to do push-ups, arbitrarily restricted their access to the bathrooms, and forced them to relieve themselves in a bucket in their cells. Over the following 5 days, psychological abuse of the prisoners by the guards became increasingly brutal. After psychologist Christina Maslach visited to evaluate the conditions, Zimbardo ended the experiment on the 6th day. The conclusion. Although the experiment was supposed to last for 14 days, it ended in just 6 days. Zimbardo and his team concluded that their experiment had unveiled how individuals would, with little resistance, conform to social roles others expect them to play. This would be especially true if such roles were strongly stereotyped, as in the case of the guards. What do I think about it? I think that this whole story is awful and that madness has taken over the various participants. How can a person turn into a big sadist in just 2 or 3 days? They must have a history. But at the same time, the roles were randomly assigned to the different participants and no one was chosen because of their sadistic character, which makes me even more perplexed. Not all the guards were bad, some were good with the prisoners, but the good guards did not intervene when the sadistic guards humiliated the prisoners. I think the participants took it as a game and not a real experience. In the prison world, the guards are much more monitored in real life with cameras and so on, so it's a little more difficult to have this kind of behavior. There is also the fact that the prisoners can take revenge outside the prison or ask for their contacts to avenge them outside the walls. The guards, just like the prisoners, try to do their time and that's it. But at the same time, I wonder how things were in the 1700s/1800 when there were no security cameras and the guards were not normal people who were chose for an experiment but could be real sadists who liked to see people suffer. If we could replicate this entire experiment 10 or 100 times and ask participants to spend a year or more in their roles, then we would have a lot more information about what really goes on inside the head of a prison guard/prisoner, and we could maybe fight and fix this kind of behavior. But it would cost too much. No one was forced to commit the various atrocities that the prisoners experienced. The guards were only asked to disrespect the prisoners, but it was on their own initiative that they decided to mistreat and humiliate them. It's true that Zimbardo let the guards do what they wanted, but for everyone to turn into a big sadist in 3 days, it's disconcerting. This experience should push the state to force the guards and prisoners to take psychology courses to better help them get through their stays in prison, because if in less than 2 days perfect individuals could turn into big sadists, I'll let you imagine people who worked for several years in a prison, but it would cost too much in taxes. In 6 days, 3 participants had to stop because they felt too uncomfortable. I think the real conclusion of this experiment is that we should all become so rich that if one day we go to prison, we can get some kind of preferential treatment. Thank you for your time and see you soon.